Вітаю, це медіа-центр Україна Одеса. І сьогодні
There. Let me introduce you Dr. Joshua Kreimeyer, Associate Professor of Clinical Mental Health Counseling at Colorado Christian University. Hi, Mr. Kreimeyer.
Hello.
Hi, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Likewise.
Thank you for your time. We know it's 6 a.m. in Colorado.
It is very early, but I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Tell us about how the psychological rehabilitation of military and civilians is going.
So far, prior to February of last year, we had established a trauma therapy counseling program, and we had close to 200 trained trauma therapists in Ukraine. And I had been focused mostly on working with the military, the veterans, and their families as well. So we had been doing a lot of work there, specifically with trauma, and I was also helping our psychologists to work more effectively with the military culture. Things were going very well. In fact, I was in Ukraine February of last year, about a week before troops crossed the border, and I was doing retreats with military families in Ukraine. This was a high point for me in the work that I was doing with rehabilitation. It's something that we've seen in the US and in the West that's helpful, and I found it to be helpful there too, that if we invite veterans and their families up to a mountain or natural location, first of all, they're more likely to come in for getting help. And secondly, getting away from their normal everyday life, many of them got more help than they expected to get. And if they needed more, then we had made the initial contact with them and got them connected to other resources. So I was very excited about that work and that effort that we had gotten to that point, and many good stories from the rehabilitation back into society before we now have the ongoing war.
Thank you. Can you tell us about, please, the traumatic experience of the family of the soldier who returned from the front line? What family can do to help him, to support him?
Yeah, there's many things. I think the first is to understand that you don't always get the same person back. One person goes to the front and another person comes back. So just knowing that and normalizing that is a huge first step. Another big step is to be very sensitive towards that person, that, for example, we don't ask direct questions about, did you do this? Did you do that? They are in the driver's seat of what they're willing, ready, and able to share. And there are professional resources to help with that. So they don't have to hold it all in, and you definitely don't have to pressure people into talking about things. That's not a good way to do things. You get a worse response from that. And I think one of the other things that I would highlight is that there is a honeymoon period when people first come back from the front. Things seem better, there's a lot that can get better from the adrenaline of reuniting with your family. But after time, the impact and the ripple effect of war starts to come up more and more. This is where I would like to let anybody know that hears this too, that there are great resources in the country right now. There are people that are trained in how to help. And I know because I've trained them and I've worked with them and seen that the things that we've trained our people to do there are effective. So the final thing I just want to say here is that when people come back from the front, that it is important for families especially to return to normal as soon as possible, doing normal things. So for example, if it's the father that's on the front, reading their children bedtime stories, becoming part of the routine again, renegotiating what the different roles look like for mother and father, because it's different when someone's gone. When one parent's gone, the other parent assumes the roles of both parents and can be resentful about the other person coming back in some ways. So it's good to have conversations about these things and to turn towards each other in trying to do positive things, playing family games, routines, again, such as bedtime stories. We want to get back to those as soon as possible. That helps. That's a helpful thing.
Thank you. What can you see as dangers in Ukrainian society if mental health issues like PTSD are not correctly treated? It may lead to some troubles like household abuse.
Yeah, there are a lot of concerns for sure that if people do not do something to help deal with the impact of war, there's a huge ripple effect through really all of society. People go from doing very big and meaningful things on the front lines, patriotic, brave, and big things, and then they come back. And some people actually struggle more with depression than the PTSD or the anxiety symptoms. They can still have those too, but one big shift is that they can get depressed, and not having a new mission or a new purpose in society, plugging back in, can be huge. Where I think what we found in the US and much of the West is that there's a concept and an organization actually called the Mission Continues. And we've had many veterans plug into this, and it's been very helpful. They create groups of veterans in most major US cities who find new ways to serve, whether it's helping in disasters, not just war, but like natural disasters, but also in rebuilding community. It keeps them plugged into having that sense of meaning and purpose. So this helps, deal with the impact of war in a big way. Also, again, the people we've trained through our center. But if we don't get that help, if we don't have, I believe also it's important to have multiple outlets, multiple doorways into different kinds of help. There is not one specific thing that's going to help all people deal with the impact of war. I think if we have the retreats that I'm a big fan of, that does catch a lot of people. But we need to have other veteran mentor groups where it's just veterans talking to other veterans, right? Some people will only go to that kind of setting. Some people feel more comfortable individually. Some people feel more comfortable in groups. So what we have, and I think we need to continue establishing in Ukraine, multiple avenues for people to get help. Otherwise, as you suggested, we do have more concerns about domestic violence, substance abuse, and also a huge thing is suicide. In many countries after war, we lose more service members to suicide than we lose in the actual war itself. And that is a very sobering statistic. So I think these resources are extremely important.
Thank you. About training the Ukrainian military psychologists, how it should be done?
I think the thing we focused on is there's a couple of primary things. The first is standards of care. There are some internationally accepted and cross-cultural too, that they've been modified to work in many different cultures. But standards of care to start with, that it's not a situation where you want everybody who wants to help says, I can help. Because people can inadvertently hurt people and make things worse if they don't know what they are doing. So I think the biggest thing is to start with standards of care. So our program really emphasized that. And we worked collaboratively with our colleagues who had asked us to come initially. And we didn't want to force, our way of doing things, but the essence of what we did, we knew would work. So we kind of taught some things and then said, now, how does this make sense here in Ukraine? And they took it as their own, right? It was not us pushing the exact standard, but in the translation, the wording of it, our Ukrainian colleagues, finalized that. We also had a standard of ethics, the ethics of how we practice. And one of the biggest ethical parameters that we talk about is do no harm. And again, there's lots of people who want to help, and that's great. But they need to know the limits of what they can help with. And for those we train, they have to have both understanding of trauma and the impact of war and complex trauma. And they also need to have a strong understanding of the military culture and how that differs from regular civilian culture. So those are some of the standards that we talk about and some of the examples of how we have trained people to more effectively work with, the impact of war.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask my colleagues if they have any questions. Anatoly?
Sure,
Oh, no.
please.
Do you have? Okay. We don't have any questions more. Thank you for your time. It was such a pleasure to talk to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Thank you. It was Dr. Joshua Kreimeyer, Associate Professor of Clinical Mental Health Counseling at Colorado Christian University. It was our last briefing for today. See you tomorrow, guys.